card was still on the kitchen table when I woke up that morning. I hadn't moved it. I don't know why. Maybe because moving it would have made everything feel more final than it already was. It said in my daughter-in-law's handwriting, neat, careful, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who never does anything by accident. Sorry, Mom. Something came up with the Hargrove account. You understand. The Hargrove account. My husband of 41 years was being buried in 3 days, and she was thinking about the Hargrove account. I made coffee. I stood at the window the way I always do in the mornings, looking out at the backyard, at the oak tree my husband planted the spring after we moved in. That was 1987. He dug the hole himself, even though his back was already giving him trouble. I told him to hire someone. He said he wanted to do it himself so he'd remember where to dig if it ever needed to come out. He never dug it out. The tree is taller than the house now. I was 63 when he got sick. I'd been married to him since I was 24. Before that, I'd been my parents' daughter, and in between, I'd been nobody's anything. Just a girl from Dayton, Ohio, with a nursing degree and a used Honda and a very clear sense that life was supposed to start any minute now. He was the one who made it start. His name was Robert. Everyone called him Bob, except me. I always called him Robert, even when we argued, even in the quiet moments at the end when he couldn't always remember what year it was. I'd sit next to him on the bed and hold his hand and say, "Robert, I'm here." And sometimes he'd squeeze back and sometimes he wouldn't, but I kept saying it. You keep saying the things that are true. We had 3 children. My oldest son, who is 40 now and lives in Phoenix, runs his own contracting business. He has a wife and 2 daughters and what I've come to think of as a very organized life. Color-coded calendar, meal prep Sundays, the kind of family that posts matching Christmas pajama photos on social media. My daughter is 37. She lives 40 minutes from me, which sounds close until you realize we see each other maybe 4 times a year, and 3 of those times are because I drove to her. My youngest son is 34. He works in finance, moves fast, talks faster, and has been meaning to visit for about 2 years now. They were not bad children when they were small. I want to be clear about that. I'm not one of those mothers who pretends the past was perfect and blames everything on whoever came later. They were good years. There were birthday parties in the backyard and road trips to Myrtle Beach, and a phase around 2003 when all 3 of them were in the kitchen on Sunday mornings helping me make pancakes, and Robert was at the table reading the paper, and I remember thinking, this is the part I'll want back someday. I was right. I do want it back. But somewhere along the way, and I've spent more time than is probably healthy trying to figure out exactly when, I stopped being their mother and started being their resource. Not in any dramatic, obvious way. It was gradual, the way a house settles. You don't notice the cracks forming. You just one day realize the door doesn't hang straight anymore. It started with money, the way it usually does. Robert and I had done reasonably well. He spent 30 years in commercial insurance, worked his way up to regional director, and we'd been careful, paid off the house, kept the cars reasonable, put a little away every month even when there wasn't much to put. We were not rich people, but we were comfortable, and that comfort, I came to understand, had registered on our children's radar in ways we hadn't anticipated. It was small things first. My oldest needed help with the down payment in 2015. Just a bridge loan, he said. We'll pay it back. We gave him $20,000. We never brought it up again, and neither did he. The following year, my daughter's salon was struggling and she needed new equipment. Robert wrote the check without blinking. He was like that. He didn't want anyone to suffer if he could help it. By the time Robert got his diagnosis, early Alzheimer's, confirmed in March of 2021, we had given away more than I fully knew. I did the accounting afterward, in the weeks after his death, sitting at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a yellow legal pad and a feeling in my chest like someone had left a window open in winter. The number was significant. Not ruinous, but significant. Not ruinous, but significant. I was never angry at Robert for that. He loved his children in the most uncomplicated way, cleanly, without keeping score. I think he believed in the way that good people sometimes believe things without evidence, that love given freely comes back freely. He wasn't entirely wrong. He was just wrong about the timing. The last 18 months were hard in ways I don't have adequate words for. Caregiving for someone with Alzheimer's is its own country. The language is different there. The rules are different. Time moves differently. You learn to be present in a very small moment because this small moment is all you have. You stop making plans that extend past the week. You learn to find the good thing in the day. The afternoon he recognized me clearly. The evening he laughed at an old episode of Frasier the way he used to. The morning I came in and he said, "There she is," like I just walked into a room at a party, and he was glad to see me. My children visited in the beginning. My oldest flew out twice in the first year. My daughter came by, brought food sometimes, sat with him for an hour or two. My youngest came once, stayed for a weekend. Seemed uncomfortable in the way young people sometimes are around illness, around the reminder that parents are not permanent. By the second year, the visits had thinned. There were reasons, always reasons, the legitimate geography of adult lives, school schedules and work projects, and the general velocity of being in your 30s with children of your own. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who guilted. I had watched my own mother do that, and I knew what it cost. But there's a difference between not guilting and not noticing. I noticed. There was a Tuesday in October, the fall before Robert died. It was a hard week. He'd had a bad stretch, confused and frightened in ways that were hard to watch, and I hadn't slept more than 4 hours any night for 10 days. I called my daughter, not to ask for anything specific, just to hear a voice that knew me. She answered, and I could hear the noise of wherever she was. A restaurant, maybe, voices and music. And she said, "Mom, can I call you back? We're in the middle of something." I said, of course, and hung up and sat in the hallway outside Robert's room for about 20 minutes, not doing anything. She called back 4 days later. Robert died in February. It was a Thursday morning, quiet, the way I'd hoped it would be. I was holding his hand. I had held it for most of 3 days by that point. The hospice nurse had been wonderful, a woman named after a river, which I found inexplicably comforting, and she told me he wasn't in pain, and I chose to believe her. My children came for the funeral, all 3 of them, and their families, and for a few days the house was full and loud, and everyone was saying the right things and bringing casseroles, and I was grateful for it. I was. You take the warmth when it comes. But then they left, and the house was quiet again. I had wanted to do a memorial, not the funeral. That had been practical and swift, the way Robert would have wanted, but a real gathering a few months later, in the spring. He'd had friends, colleagues, the men from his Wednesday morning golf group, the neighbors we'd known for 20 years. I wanted to have people over. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to be in a room full of people who had known him alive, not just known him as a name in an obituary. I set a date for early May. I sent invitations, real ones, paper, the kind he would have appreciated. I called people personally. I made a list of what I'd need. I asked my children if they'd come. My oldest said yes, absolutely, mark it down, and then in April told me he'd double booked with a work trip to Dallas, and could we possibly move it to June? And when June came, he said the timing was just really difficult right now. My daughter said she'd try, and then the week before told me her in-laws were visiting from Savannah, and she didn't feel like she could ask them to change their plans. My youngest didn't come to the memorial. He texted the morning of to say he was sorry. Things had come up. He'd call me that evening. He didn't call that evening. I had 17 people at that memorial. The dining room table sat 12 comfortably. I had expected closer to 40. Robert's friend from the golf group came, and his wife. My neighbor, a widow herself, who had known since the Clinton administration, 2 of Robert's former colleagues, one of whom drove 4 hours from Cleveland, my friend from the book club who brought flowers from Cleveland, my friend from the book club who brought flowers, a few others. The chairs I had arranged in the living room were mostly empty. I had set them up in rows, thinking we'd need the space. We didn't need the space. I did not cry during the memorial. I talked about Robert. I said what he was like. I said he planted a tree because he wanted to remember where to dig if it ever needed to come out. People laughed in the way people laugh when they recognize someone they knew in a story. That felt like enough, in the moment. I cried later, alone in the kitchen, doing the dishes. Not because my children hadn't come. Exactly. Or not only because of that. I cried because I finally understood something I had been not understanding for several years. I had been telling myself a story about my family, that they were busy, that they cared in ways they didn't always show, that the distance was logistical and not emotional. Standing in that kitchen with the water running and the house quiet, I ran out of ways to keep telling it. The weeks after the memorial were the loneliest I've experienced since my first winter away from home at 22. Not a dramatic loneliness, a quiet one, the kind that settles into the furniture. I started going through Robert's things, not to clean out, I wasn't ready for that, but just to be near them. His study, the bookshelves he'd organized by subject, the coffee mug on his desk that still had a faint ring at the bottom, the filing cabinet in the corner where he kept everything, insurance documents, tax returns going back to 1994, the deed to the house, our wills. I opened it looking for something specific. I don't remember what, and in the second drawer, under a folder marked Household, I found an envelope with my name on it. His handwriting. I sat down on the floor of his study. The carpet is beige. We've always meant to replace it. There's a stain near the window from when our youngest knocked over a bottle of grape juice in 2001, and we never quite got it out. And I sat on that carpet and held the envelope for a long time before I opened it. He had written the letter 2 years before he died, during a period when he was still mostly clear, when he knew what was coming and was trying to be useful about it. It was 4 pages, legal pad, blue ink, the deliberate handwriting of a man who knew he was writing something that mattered. He wrote about us. About the early years, the apartment in Columbus with the radiator that clanked all night, the summer we drove to New Mexico because neither of us had ever seen the desert. He wrote about specific things. The green coat I wore when he proposed, a Saturday in 1993 when we took the kids to a fall festival in the country and everyone was cold but no one wanted to leave. He wrote them down because he was afraid of losing them. He wanted me to have them back if he couldn't hold on to them himself. And then, near the end of the letter, he wrote about the children. He wrote, "I've watched you protect them from consequences for a long time. I did it too. I think we thought we were loving them, and we were. But I'm not sure we were doing them any favors. I hope they figure it out. I hope they treat you the way you deserve to be treated. But if they don't, and you'll know in your bones if they don't, I want you to take care of yourself first. You've taken care of everyone else long enough. Take the trip we always talked about. Use the money. Don't wait for permission from our kids. You don't need it." I read that letter 3 times on the floor of his study. The third time I read it, it started to get dark outside and I hadn't turned on any lights, and I just sat there in the dimness with his words and felt something shift in me. Not heal, exactly, but shift. I called my youngest son the next day. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me. I told him I needed to talk to him, and he said, "Of course, Mom, what's going on?" in the slightly wary voice that I'd gotten used to. The voice that was already calculating whether I was going to ask him for something difficult. I didn't ask him for anything. I told him I had found a letter from his father, and I wanted him to know what it said. I read him parts of it. There was a long silence on the other end, and then he said, "I'm sorry I didn't come to the memorial." Just like that. No excuse, no explanation. I said, "I know." He said, I don't know, Mom. I've been bad at this." He said it flatly, the way people say true things they've been avoiding. "I've been bad at showing up, and I don't have a good reason for it." I let the silence sit for a moment before I said anything. I have learned in 63 years that silences do some of the work that words can't. Then I told him that I loved him, that I had always loved him, that his father had loved him without condition, and that that love was not contingent on whether he showed up on time or called when he said he would. But I also told him that I was done waiting, that I was going to take the trip to Portugal his father and I had been talking about for 15 years, that I was going to stop keeping the guest rooms in a state of constant readiness for visits that rarely materialized, that I was going to start saying yes to things that were good for me and no to things that weren't. He was quiet again. Then he said, "That sounds right, Mom. I don't know what the future looks like with my oldest or with my daughter. I've stopped trying to predict it. I called both of them and had versions of the same conversation. And my oldest got a little defensive in the way he always does when he's embarrassed, and my daughter cried, and both of those things were honest reactions, and I'll take honesty over performance any day. What I know is this. 2 months ago, my youngest flew out for a long weekend. He slept in the guest room, which I had finally redecorated the way I'd always wanted. Pale blue walls, new curtains, the good quilt from the closet where it had been folded since 2018. We drove out to the cemetery on Saturday morning, and he stood at Robert's grave for a long time without saying anything, and I didn't rush him. That evening, we sat on the back porch, and he showed me pictures of a place in Lisbon he thought I'd like. Dad would have liked it too, he said. I said yes, he would have. The oak tree was right there at the edge of the yard, taller than the house, taking up more sky than anything else. Robert planted it so he'd remember where to dig if it ever needed to come out. He never needed to take it out. It just kept growing. I think about that sometimes, about all the things we plant not knowing if we'll ever need to undo them, about how some of them just grow and grow until they're bigger than the reason we put them in the ground in the first place. I don't need my children's permission to live my life. Robert told me that in 4 pages of blue ink sitting in a filing cabinet waiting for me to be ready to hear it. I heard it. I booked the trip to Portugal last week. I leave in October. I've never been to Europe. I'm 63 years old, and I've never been to Europe, and I am going to stand somewhere with good wine and old stone and the Atlantic somewhere nearby. And I'm going to think about the green coat I was wearing when Robert proposed to me outside a drugstore in Columbus in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday in 1986, and I'm going to feel grateful for all of it. The hard parts and the quiet parts, and the parts I couldn't have written if I tried. All of it. I've been thinking about the oak tree a lot lately. Robert planted it when his back was already bad, and he did it himself anyway, because he wanted to remember where to dig if it ever needed to come out. He never needed to take it out. It just grew. That's what happens when you put something in the ground with care. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just keeps going. I think about that when I think about what I did wrong as a mother and what I did right, and how those two things got so tangled up for so long that I couldn't tell them apart. I loved my children without keeping score. I thought that was the right thing, and in some ways it was. But I also protected them from the natural weight of their own choices. I wrote the checks. I made the excuses. I rearranged my expectations to fit whatever they gave me. I told myself that was love. It was love. It was love. It was also, I've come to understand, a kind of dishonesty. I was teaching them, without meaning to, that showing up didn't matter, that I would always be there regardless, that there were no consequences to the distance they kept. What Robert understood and wrote down in 4 pages of blue ink so I'd have it when I needed it was something I had to learn the harder way. That genuine care for someone isn't just warmth. It's also honesty. It's being clear about what you need. It's refusing to pretend that absence doesn't cost anything. I had the warmth for decades. The honesty took longer. When my youngest called and said I've been bad at this, no excuse, no explanation, just the plain truth of it, I recognized that as a kind of strength I hadn't seen from him before. It takes something real in a person to say a hard thing plainly. It takes the willingness to look at yourself without softening the picture. I don't know where he found that. Maybe he'd been carrying it for a while. Maybe the conversation gave him room to put it down. What I know is that I had to find that same thing in myself first. I had to stop being clever about my own pain, stop explaining it away, stop making it reasonable, stop being so understanding about things that had genuinely hurt me. There's a version of intelligence that's really just avoidance dressed up in good vocabulary. I was fluent in that for years. The memorial with its empty chairs was not a punishment for anything I did. It was just the shape my life had taken, the accumulated result of 100 small decisions made by several people over many years. Understanding that, Really understanding it, not just saying it, was what let me stop being angry and start being clear. Clear about what I wanted, clear about what I was willing to give and what I wasn't, clear about the fact that 63 is not old, and Portugal has been waiting long enough. Robert knew me well enough to write it down before he forgot. You've taken care of everyone else long enough. I heard him, finally, and I think that's what he was counting on.